My full name is Robert Roy Gable. I live in Kawakawa and work as a chartered accountant in public practice. My hapu is Ngati Tara.
Do you confirm that on the 22nd of August you filed a brief of evidence in support of Ngati Tara's interest in this remedies hearing?
Yes, I do.
And would you please then provide an oral summary of that brief of evidence?
Yes. May it please the Tribunal, on behalf of Ngati Tara, I have filed a claim with the Waitangi Tribunal that includes treaty claims in relation to various land blocks, the desecration of wahi tapu and taonga, and in relation to the environment. The claim I filed has been registered in the Waitangi Tribunal as Y1886. Hakapapa, Ngati Tara descends from the tupuna Mania, whose father was Te Rurunga. There are also accounts of her father being Kahukura. Te Parata and Waitonga are also eponymous tupuna of Ngati Tara. I can hakapapa to both Te Parata on my grandfather's side and Waitonga on my grandmother's side. Te Parata and Waitonga are brother and sister. I hakapapa to Ngati Tara through my mother, Hururangi Gable, ni Piripi. She also affiliates to Te Pātū Hapu. I also hakapapa to Te Pātū through the tupuna Rutene Tawa, who was an important Te Pātū chief. Mania, the origins of Ngati Tara. Mania is the eponymous ancestress of Ngati Tara. On one occasion, Mania and her people were camped at Waitapu near Aurere. They sought refuge at a local island known as Puketu, following a battle with Ngati Awa. Mania would travel back to Waitapu during the night to fetch water from a nearby stream. One night, Mania was caught by a Ngati Awa warrior who chased her with his mere paunamu. Trapped, she lifted her kakahu to show she was female, as there's an ancient tikanga against killing women with a mere paunamu. Despite this tikanga, Mania was killed. Mania now takes the form of a toka at Waitapu. Hapu and iwi relationships. Ngati Tara has been a prominent hapu in and around Doubtless Bay for centuries. The records show that Te Pātū was very prominent during the 19th century, and we accord them iwi status. We acknowledge that Ngati Tara is a hapu of Te Pātū. We also have very close hakapapa connections to Patu Koraha, Te Rorohuri, and Te Whānau Moana hapu. There was much interaction and association between Ngati Tara and the neighbouring hapu, and there still is to this day. Generally, those who hakapapa to Ngati Tara can also hakapapa to Te Pātū, Patu Koraha, Te Rorohuri, Whānau Moana, Kenana and Kauanga. Reason we can do this is because of the intermarriage that happened throughout the region. As a result, there are overlapping mana whenua interests between the hapu, and we acknowledge this. Parapara Native School was established in 1880 and was the second school in the area. For quite some time, the only school in the area was located at Parapara. Students would come from as far as Patuwhiwhi to attend Parapara Native School. They would remain in Parapara for the week, return to Patuwhiwhi for the weekend, and travel back to Parapara after church on Sunday. While in Parapara, the children would stay with whānau. Our strong ties with the people at Patuwhiwhi allowed for this kind of awhi and interaction. There were even Patuwhiwhi trustees on the native school boards of trustees.
Sir, can I just clarify there's a reference to an oral summary and
yes, I see Mr. Gable's reading the summary, so you might as well just continue. Read the summary, we'll add it to the record.
That's agreeable, then yes, of course, sir.
That's what he's doing, isn't it, Mr. Naden? He's reading the summary that you handed.
He is, in fact, yes.
I acknowledge the close relationships between Ngati Tara and our neighbouring hapu. I also acknowledge that there are overlapping mana whenua interests amongst these hapu. However, I am also certain there are significant sites and areas that are distinctly Ngati Tara. The heart of Ngati Tara is Parapara. The principal Ngati Tara marae is Parapara marae, which sits under the sacred mountains named Hikurangi, Maunga Taniwha, Te Ahuponga and Taratara. Although Parapara is the heart of Ngati Tara has mana whenua beyond Parapara. I know the boundaries of Ngati Tara because I spent a lot of time with my grandfather, Henare Piripi, at Parapara. He was versed in Ngati Tara history and hakapapa. He would only pass on his knowledge by word of mouth. This is why such knowledge was not recorded in books or other records. I learnt a lot of hapu kōrero and history from my grandfather and his teachings. I also spent a lot of time at Aurere with my granduncle, Te Rau Piripi Rātima. Although he was a Rātima, he only used the surname Piripi. Te Rau and my grandfather would always speak of the relationship between Ngati Tara and their lands. I followed them and I listened to their stories. That is how I learned. Our kaumātu would talk about sites where they fished, sites where they dug for gum, and sites where they lived. This is how we know the boundaries of Ngati Tara, through our land markings, through the whānau that occupied certain areas, and through our traditional hunting, fishing and burial sites. Ngati Tara occupied land at Parapara, Lake Ohia, Aurere, Wera and further up to Puheke. Ngati Tara also spent much of their time along the coastline fishing and gathering shellfish. Tokero Beach was one of the major sources of kaimoana and we ranged all over it for this purpose. We did not stop at Tokero Beach either. We wanted to, we would go fishing and gathering shellfish on the Rangaunu side of the peninsula. My grandmother held interest in the Karikari block at the northern end of the Karikari Peninsula. This includes the Merita and Taumatawiwi blocks. She and my grandfather were cousins and could hakapapa back to the same tupuna kaporoa. Her sisters were all named as owners in the list of owners of the Taumatawiwi block. My grandmother and her sisters hakapapa to the area through their mother Ngane ko Huru, ni Rutene. That's her married name, Rutene. This is why I say Ngati Tara interest in the land can extend to the northern part of the Karikari Peninsula. The Harihona whānau also have interest in the northern Karikari Peninsula, as does the Kirui, Pekahu and Taha whānau. These are all Ngati Tara whānau. People of Wera Marae have very strong ties to Ngati Tara. There were plans to build another Wera Marae not far from Ramp Road at the southern Rangiputa Station boundary line. It would have been appropriate to build Wera Marae there because it is within Ngati Tara mana whenua. I now turn to speak some of our important sites of significance. Aurere. There was a small settlement at Aurere when I was a child. My aunt Ani Naikowi lived there. She also was of Ngati Tara. I would often visit her and she would give me a kōrero on the history of our whānau in the Aurere area. She made me write all the information down so that I would not forget it. She made me do this so that I knew my connection to the land. Te Rau Piripi also lived at Aurere during the later years of his life. There are still Ngati Tara whānau that live at Aurere today. They maintain our mana whenua connection to this area. O Kokiri. This is the land block at Aurere named O Kokiri, and Ngati Tara have strong ties to this land. The Okokiri block is located north of Aurere River and runs along the coastline of the Tokero Beach. Lake Ohia. Our tupuna would often row up the Hakautu stream from Doubtless Bay to access Lake Ohia. They would row across Lake Ohia and drag their waka through to the Rangaunu harbour. Hakautu was also the name of the Okokiri block. In this way, our tupuna saved a great amount of time because otherwise they would have to hoi their waka all around the peninsula to get to Rangaunu harbour from Doubtless Bay. Lake Ohia was once the scene of a bustling community. During the 1870s, there was a kauri gum boom. As a result, the Karikari Peninsula became one of the far north gum fields. In 1924, the Royal Commission on Kauri Gum Reserves recorded that the gum digging population at Lake Ohia reached 1,500 in the summer months. There was a shop, post office, and a number of gum digging houses which were one-room huts with a dirt floor. Many Ngati Tara people lived at Lake Ohia to take advantage of the gum digging fields on Puheke. In the book On the Pioneer Battalion, it is recorded that my granduncle, Te Rau, gave the post office address at Lake Orohia as his next of kin's address. His brother Henare Piripi was living there at the time. When my granduncle Te Rau returned from World War I, he lived at Lake Orohia, and during his years there he worked as a gum digger. He was known to have planted trees at Rangiputa. Our kōrero is that our Ngati Tara people dug for gum in this particular area because of their established ties to the land. They would not dig gum just anywhere. They had a connection to the areas in which they dug. Also, there was a tikanga in relation to digging gum, and our old people abided by it. Lake Orohia was one of the main sites for gum digging. There were gum fields throughout the Karikari Peninsula, including on the Puheke Block, and extending as far north as Rotakawa. If you turn to page 13 of your bundle of documents, you'll see a map showing the gum fields on Puheke. Tokerau Beach. Ngati Tara would gather kaimoana from the shores of Tokerau. When I was growing up there, I did not recall seeing other hapu or groupings using the beach nearly as much as we did. Te Rau would police the Tokerau Beach. This was because Ngati Tara relied heavily on the beach for its kaimoana, and he was always concerned about replenishing stocks and fishing in season. He would travel the beach on horseback. Te Rau had no qualms about evicting people from the area if they did not adhere to the restrictions. Most people understood the need for a sustainable resource, and so the restrictions that Te Rau upheld were respected. When he passed on, I remember my Auntie Annie taking on this role, and she never seemed to have any trouble either controlling the beach. Our old people would move to the coast when the fish were fat. This was a seasonal thing, and they could only fish at certain times of the year. There were grave consequences if people fished out of season, as this would affect a number of mullet, snapper or kahawai that were available for the rest of the hapu. They also knew that kina were fat when the pohutukawa trees were in bloom. This is how intact our old people were with their environment. There were a number of fishing grounds along Tokerau Beach that Ngati Tara used to gather kaimoana. I remember as children we would go right to the northern end of Tokerau Beach if that was where the shellfish were. We would light fires on the beach to keep warm, so it is not like we were worried about being in the wrong area. Dairy farming along Tokerau. Dairy farming was an important source of income for Ngati Tara whānau. I was quite involved in dairy farming when I was growing up, as were a lot of other whānau around us at the time. Starting when I was quite young, I would milk cows along Tokerau Beach with my Auntie Annie and my cousins. We would have to search for the cows that would be grazing all over the Kokiri block. We got to know the whenua this way. Concluding remarks, my grandfather and uncle lived near the Puheke block at Lake Orohia. My grandparents owned land nearby as well. They dug gum all over Puheke, and we all fished along its shores, including the Rangaunu harbour side. I think it's significant that in this day my granduncle Te Rau commanded Tokerau Beach all the way to Te Pikinga. You cannot do this kind of thing without having mana whenua. Although we no longer owned it, we continued to range over much of the Puheke block. Kia ora.
Mr Naden, we'll add that to the record. It's S19.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Just remain there.
I'll just double check if anyone's changed their mind in terms of questions. No. Nobody.
No, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
No. There's no questions for you, Mr Gable. Thank you for presenting your evidence.
Kia ora.